Let's hit the high road. Let's hit the high road. It's the first touch, strong connection. It lays deep in your soul.
Hi, this is Nancy Yearout, and welcome to High Road to Humanity. And I have a lovely lady here today. Joan D. Stamm is here. And Joan, welcome to High Road.
Thank you. Thanks for
Hopefully I'm
having me.
pronouncing your name right. Is it Stamm?
Well, it's really pronounced Stamm because it's a German name.
Okay.
But most people say Stamm, so I answer to
Like
both.
tomato. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, okay. All right. Well, it's nice to have you. You guys, she's written this cool book, The Language of Flowers in the Time of COVID. And I'll tell you what, I'm a real flower lover. And so this is going to be a fun show. Let me give you a little idea of what we're going to talk about today. In 2020, as COVID-19 spread from Asia to North America, Zen Buddhist and Ikebana practitioner Joan Stamm was forced to cancel her long anticipated trip to Japan, where she had planned to research a flower temple pilgrimage and learn the deeper meaning of flowers known as little Buddhas. I think this is really cool. But the lockdown made her stay home. And that's the story she's going to tell us today. She ended up writing this really cool book, The Language of Flowers. And I just want you to know that she has lived in Kobe, Japan in the early 90s. She has where her interest in Zen and the Ikebana took root. On her return to the States, she continued to practice and study Zen and Tibetan Buddhism, and for the next 30 years with various notable teachers. So she's quite well versed in this. And in addition, she has training in meditation, Buddhism. She holds an MFA in writing and literature from Bennington College and a BA in art from the Evergreen State College. So you have quite the story. But I love this. You lived in Japan and then you hadn't gone back for a while. And then you decided to go back in August, which is the time for, I think it's the Lotus blossoms. Is that right?
Oh, well, you mean this before I wrote the book, I was planning to go in April.
Yeah, you were
for
going
the
to
cherry
go.
blossoms.
Yes.
For the cherry blossoms. And yes, I'd been planning that trip for a very long time.
Tell us your story. What happened?
Well, first let me just tell you what I wanted to do there.
Okay.
So for about at least 10 years, it had been about 10 years since I came across an article in a magazine, a Japanese magazine in English, but very glossy magazine. And there was an article about these flower temples or flower temple pilgrimage in the Kansai region, which is Kyoto, Osaka, Kobe region. And I thought, oh, I'd really like to do that someday. And but in the meantime, I was working on other projects. And then I thought, well, in 2020, I'm going to spend almost the month of April in Kyoto, and I'm going to research these temples. And I had written to one of the monks that started this pilgrimage, these flower temples. And in their literature, they describe flowers as little Buddhas. And that, as being a Buddhist, that really intrigued me.
Yeah.
So I planned this trip with a friend and her brother. And we had all our reservations and we were planning to leave in April of 2020. And then, of course, the pandemic hit and everything was canceled.
Right.
So
but it prompted this.
It prompted that, yes. Yeah. So I couldn't write about wonderful flower temples in Japan, but I was already sort of geared up to write about something.
Right.
So I started writing about Japanese flowers, or what's considered flowers that are native to Asia, mostly Japan. I started writing about those flowers that I was growing. I was growing some of them, and some I wasn't able to grow. Mm-hmm. And then looking into a lot of the symbolism and the metaphors, and there's just a lot of different lore, poetic lore around flowers in Japanese culture. Mm-hmm. So I delved into that, and and also Ikebana is part of a greater path called Kado.
Okay.
Kado means the way of flowers.
Mm.
And in Japanese culture, there are lots of dos or ways. So there's Kado, the way of flowers. There's Chado, the way of tea. There's Shodo, the way of calligraphy.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. I've
And
had the calligrapher on my show from Japan. Yeah.
yeah,
Flowers have energy. I want to talk about this. And I know you
okay.
know this. Yeah, because, they have, well, and I wrote this down, flowers and trees and the spirit of flowers. This is from your book. And trees figure prominently in many Japanese art forms. And I think this
Mhm.
is cool because we don't seem to honor the energy of the flowers and the trees. And this is what they do. And I love that you study this and that you realize this. A lot of people, they're a completely different culture where they look at things
Mhm.
completely differently
Mhm.
than we do. So I think it's really cool. Throughout the book, I just tell you guys, she has all different flowers. And I was hoping maybe you would talk to us about some of them.
Yeah. Well, gee, where to start?
Well, can we start with the plum blossom? Because I wrote down, I love this because the plum blossom you said is associated with a time of hope and endurance, or some believe it's a protection against evil. And I didn't know that.
Yeah. Well, that was just what I uncovered in my research that
Yeah.
plum blossoms, even though Japan is really known for their cherry blossoms, but
Yeah.
originally plum blossoms, or the time that plum blooms, is in a way a lot more important because it's the first tree that blooms in spring. It blooms way before cherry blossoms, and it blooms almost in winter. I think it starts blooming in February, and there could still be snow on the ground. So it's considered a flower that really endures adversity, and
Mm.
it's become a symbol for that, which is why it's considered one of the three friends of winter.
Oh, I love
And so it also has a sweet scent, and but so here you have winter and it's really cold and there's snow, and then you have this sweet scent of this plum blossom blooming. And so there's just a lot of poetry around that
I love that.
in
Well,
Japanese culture.
you talk about in your book, and this really hit home with me. There was a phrase from, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing the name right. It's Sacho. Uh, he was a
Oh,
Buddhist.
Saicho?
Yeah, and
Mhm.
he wrote, "Light up your corner. By lighting up your corner of the world, you light up the whole world." And I
Mhm.
always say that because and I think that's really profound that you put this in the book because I feel like
Mhm.
right now, each one of us are these little lights that as we burn brighter, it changes things here.
Mhm.
And how, like, did that come about where,
Yeah, well, I was struck by that comment too. I was doing some research on different kinds of Buddhism other than Zen. In this case, it was Tendai Buddhism.
okay.
Uh, um, and that Saicho founded Tendai Buddhism. And this whole phrase of our corner of light really struck me because
Mhm.
he's really pointing towards everybody has a gift to offer the world. And some people get to express that gift and other people don't, through different, their upbringing, or they're just don't ever get to really express who they really are. Or if they do, they're not honored for who they are. And so I sort of see people as different kinds of flowers, and every flower, we would never condemn a flower, right? If every flower
Right.
is beautiful, but
Right.
they're all completely different.
Like we
Some,
are.
yeah, like we are. Some are big and bold and flashy, and others are small and delicate. And there's different colors and shapes and sizes and heights. And but we
Some
love them
are
all.
thorny.
Some are thorny, yeah.
I love it. Well, it's true though, because you know what, and I'm a spiritual kind of girl. And I always feel like instead of looking on the outside, we really need to look at people's inside their soul. Like, have you ever met somebody, they were just so kind that you didn't even remember what they looked like, but they were so kind that you remembered
Mhm,
their
mhm,
energy or their soul. And
mhm,
that's, I think, how the flowers are too. They have
mhm.
energy, you know?
Yeah, they really do. And when you're working with Ikebana, you start being more in tune, I guess you would say, with that energy, because you want to arrange these flowers in a way that maybe expresses some of that energy of that flower. And so you kind of have to look at, see how it grows, you know, which way it bends, what's the front, what's the back. You know, the vase that you use is important because that can help you tell your story or help you express the energy of this flower. And then it's part of the deeper layer of Ikebana. And why too, I think it's so important to grow your own flowers. I mean, it's one thing to go down to the florist, you can buy some flowers and that's great. And, you know, sometimes we have to do that because we can't all grow flowers. But growing your own flowers just adds another dimension to it. And you start, you start tuning more into the seasons, and
Sure.
you get to watch the flower come up from, you know, a little nothing to a great big beautiful thing. And
yeah. Now I'm big, I grew up on a farm, and so my mom was into flowers. She was really into roses, but I have flower boxes, and I did flower boxes this year, and they're beautiful, and they're just, and I did purples, and you know, it just brightens my day to go out there and water them. And just like you said, as they grow larger, and I went out on a limb, no pun intended, and I got this what are they, Gruber daisies, you know, and I got a couple of them. And so they were beautiful. One was orange, one was pink. And then of course they did their thing and they're done. But what I noticed is I repotted them, and one of them has, and I've never seen these come up before. So I looked, and there's just a little round circle of, and I didn't even know how, I mean, it's, you know, they're beautiful. They're so cool. You see them in the store, and it's starting from the very bottom and it's coming up, and I'm growing like, it's the first one I've ever done because they're very delicate and hard to grow.
Yeah, I think they are.
Yeah, so it's like, what? This is so cool. You know what I mean? Anyway, I just think flowers are great. Now, I'm up here in the mountains, so what I did this year is the lady told me, I went to buy my flowers, and she said, now you need to put mint in between the flowers and the deer won't eat them. And so that's what I did. And the mint,
did that work?
Yes, the mint is thriving in between. I mean, you know, it looks kind of cool. I don't know. I thought it was kind of neat. You know, you talk about daffodils. And when I read this in your book, you say it celebrates spring, and it's true. And you know, you wrote they can grow anywhere with little or no care in any soil, and deer don't eat them either. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, well, where I lived on Orcas Island, the deer would eat everything. Well, they actually didn't eat daffodils, I don't think, because they are toxic, but they would eat other plants that are considered toxic. And so I lived there for about maybe 3 years before I actually just had to get a deer fence because I couldn't grow anything. I was using all those deer repellents and trying to grow flowers that were deer resistant. And on the island, because there are no predators for the deer, they're just everywhere. And they'll eat everything. They're very hungry. So I finally had to get a deer fence, and then I could grow whatever I wanted.
That's crazy. And I like the deer, but I'm like you.
I do too. And I, you know, they used to like just walk through my yard, and you'd have their babies, and I loved it. But you know, I was an Ikebana practitioner. I wanted to grow plants. But yeah, and daffodils, I mean, I'm just assuming they'll grow anywhere. I mean, I live in the Pacific Northwest, so you know, we have a whole different climate. I think you're in Arizona, right?
Yeah, but you know, they come up. I'm just moved here from New Mexico, but we always had daffodils, and I had them here too. They were left over. Somebody had them when I moved here, and they came up, you know, and they were beautiful. So when I read it, I smiled because I was like, yeah, they do. And even I grew up in Ohio and Michigan area. We always had daffodils. You know, I want to talk about cherry blossoms. I'm so jealous. I would imagine you've been to the Cherry Blossom Festival.
Yeah, I have.
Well, I want to know all about this because they are so beautiful, and you see them, they show them on television. And how long do they bloom for when you go to Japan and see the cherry?
Well, not very long. which is why they're a symbol for impermanence. Because they're so beautiful and they don't bloom very long. And the next thing you know, they're floating down, into the gutters. So in Japan, they celebrate that.
Right.
And so there's a lot of cherry trees everywhere, and you take a picnic blanket and food and wine, and you just have a party. And so there'll be just people out on a sunny spring day sitting underneath the cherry trees, enjoying themselves. And it's just really a time to celebrate.
I love it. Well, now I want a couple questions I have. How are the cherries? Do they taste the same as the cherries that we buy
Oh, I
here?
don't even know. Most of them don't produce cherries. They're simply
They're for
grown
flowering
for their
only?
blossoms. Yeah, I don't even think they get cherries. I don't ever notice any
Excuse me.
cherries on the cherry trees. They're
So,
flowering cherry trees.
so they're not, they don't
Ornamental,
produce
I guess you would say ornamental cherry tree.
okay, yeah. So they don't
Yeah.
produce fruit at all. Okay.
I
So
mean, I'm not absolutely sure of that, but I don't remember ever seeing cherries on a cherry tree in
yeah, that's
Japan.
what I was wondering. I'm like, well, because I love cherries and I actually bought some
Yeah.
at the grocery store recently and they weren't like outrageously expensive because usually cherries have become very costly to buy
Yeah.
by the
Yeah, they
pound.
are.
I will
Yeah.
say that. You
Mm.
also talk in your book, you say the Japanese have defined, I thought this was interesting, 11 steps in the flowering of cherry trees. Now, what
Mhm.
does all that mean? I don't explain that to the audience. What does it?
Well, because they're just so honored, the cherry trees are just celebrated in Japan. And so there's actually a cherry blossom forecast to let you know when the first cherry trees are going to bloom and where. And
Right.
I mean, if you wanted to start in the southernmost part of Japan and work north, you could probably go through cherry blossoms for a couple months. But
Cool.
because they're so celebrated, then you have people watching, when they bloom, or not even just when they bloom, like pre-bloom, the bud stage, and then partly open, and then fully open, and so yeah, it's just become something that people watch out for, and
Yeah. Is it as
have fun with.
magnificent as I think it is?
Oh, in places, yeah, when they've
I
planted thousands of them. I mean, and that was supposed to be part of what we were seeing. I hadn't been in Japan in spring for a long time. I was there when I lived there in the early 90s, but I usually went back in the fall. So I was really looking forward to this trip because it was in April and it was cherry blossom time. So we had lots of things planned, and one temple we were planning to go to had like 1,000 cherry trees
Oh my gosh.
planted. It's a World Heritage Site called Daigoji. And then there's a mountain, Yoshino, Mount Yoshino, where the cherry trees start blooming at the base, and they work their way up, and you take a train up there. It's just supposed to be fabulous, and so I hadn't done that before either. I was really looking forward to it.
Well, you plan on going back, is that right?
Yeah, sometime. I don't have any immediate plans to go back, but
I think you will.
I would like to go back in spring because I would like to go to some of those flower temples that I never got to.
I love that. I love that. Well, I'm intuitive, so I predict 2 years and you'll be back.
Okay.
Okay. I don't do that very often, but I'll throw that in there. Something you talk about, and I grew up with this. My mom was a real flower person, and I grew up on a farm. And, even after we moved from the farm, I mean, their whole backyard was roses and flowers. But one thing she always had was wisteria. And wisteria to me is magical because it smells so wonderful. And I didn't know this. You say in the book that some grow wild in the forests of Japan.
Yeah, definitely. They grow wild and they just twine up the trees. Yeah.
No
Yeah.
idea.
Unfortunately, I couldn't grow wisteria where I lived. I just didn't have the right conditions for it. But I love wisteria too. I just think it's, like you say, it is magical the way it hangs, just droops down, and
yeah.
there's two different kinds of wisteria. Also, I didn't know before. One kind that starts blooming from the tip up, and the other starts blooming from the top down.
Right. And I've
And
seen, I think, from the top down where it hangs. Is that right?
oh,
Yeah.
yeah, and I'm not sure if that's the Asian one or there is an American wisteria,
Okay.
or a Western wisteria, but they're all beautiful.
They
They're
are.
all beautiful.
I wonder what the spiritual meaning is behind wisteria. Do you know? Or
Well, there was that one haiku that I put in the book that Basho wrote,
you want to read it?
and yeah, do you know? I mean,
I don't know
I
what page it's on.
yeah, it'd take me a minute to find
Well,
it.
now
But,
you're going to ask me something I don't know. Go ahead. I think it would be cool because, I don't know. Some of these flowers, they're just so beautiful. Wisteria is one of my favorite. And if you guys don't know what it is, it's purple and it smells like lilacs and like lavenders. Its perfume is so strong and there's always so many
mhm.
bees around it,
Yeah, well, here it is. So it's very short. It's just a little haiku. Exhausted, seeking an inn, wisteria flowers.
Mhm.
So you really have to kind of look at some of the commentary on that, but it has kind of a double meaning in this sense, and also double meaning in the book, and that it was a great thing to behold. Wisteria, it's beautiful, and you feel maybe joyous seeing it, but
Mhm.
it also, because the way it hangs down, it's sort of melancholy.
Yeah.
And so since I was talking about the pandemic and all the suffering that was going on, I used it as that metaphor to talk about that.
Yeah.
That it was the time of wisteria, and so it
Okay. Yeah.
beautiful wisteria, but also sort of melancholy wisteria.
Yeah, and I need to say that through the book, you guys, she talks all about because she wrote this during COVID. I just think it was almost like I felt like it was your way of kind of uplifting us with the flowers, even though we were going through a tough time, with the pandemic and all of that.
Yeah, it was definitely how I uplifted myself.
Like, yes, yes. And I just kept
um,
doing my show, through the whole thing because everybody's like, oh, I can't go. But I just kept talking to people like you, which was
mm,
wonderful. And then I thought, oh, you just wrote this and you connected with the flowers because you couldn't go to Japan. So you said, what's the next best thing? Right.
yeah, pretty much. I mean, I just delved into writing about flowers and doing flower arrangements and
Yeah.
trying to grow more flowers. And, I talk about a couple little trips off island where I actually went to go find a wisteria. I had my day right. I just have to grow a wisteria and I'm going to go off island to find one. And, but I really didn't have the right conditions. So the woman that worked in the store kind of talked me out of it. And I ended up buying a
Oh,
peony instead.
okay. All right. And now that's one of my questions for you. What is one of your favorite flowers? What is your favorite flower? I guess I should ask.
I really do love peonies, especially the kind that are the single petaled,
Okay.
where it really has a defined center that's usually a different color than the petals are. And so the one that I ended up buying at the nursery was called Sequestered Sunshine,
Oh, wow.
with a yellow peony with a kind of
Oh,
burgundy center. It was
oh,
amazing.
I love it. Well, I wrote this down from your book. You said 8th century Buddhist monks brought peonies, the king of the flowers, to Japan from China.
Mhm.
This really caught my interest here. They brought it for the root, flower, and seeds, all tonics for inflammation, arthritis, muscle cramps, lupus, spasms, and fever. I had no idea.
Yeah, I didn't either until I started researching it. I mean, I'm just looking at flowers as far as their bloom goes, but
Right.
a lot of flowers, of course, are medicinal,
Mhm.
different parts of them, and that's a whole nother study.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, I'm just thinking to myself, wow, I wonder if you can get like a tincture or something like that, you know?
Yeah, probably, although I'm not, yeah, I don't know.
Okay.
And maybe a flower essence. There might be a
Uh,
peony flower essence. I know there is a cosmos flower essence. And cosmos is not a Japanese flower, it's actually from Mexico, but It's one flower that I'm really fond of. My mother was really fond of cosmos. And as a teenager, I just couldn't understand why. I thought it was just kind of a simple, basic flower. But now I actually appreciate it for that fact. And it's also a good pollinator flower. So,
Okay, I didn't
and
know.
that was one of the temples that I actually did see. I went to Japan in 2018 and I actually did see that flower temple, and it was a cosmos temple.
Talk about these temples a little bit more. I mean,
Yeah.
is it a temple like I think it is? Like I would imagine it's a building, or talk about with flowers all over it, or what is it like? Yeah, I mean, what is it?
Well, that's sort of like a whole compound. So there's the temple where people go to worship, but then there's always the garden around the temple. And some of the temples in Japan have huge gardens around them. And
Wow,
people go there now to see the gardens more than anything, although they also have a lot of Buddhist icons that are certainly beautiful.
great.
But this particular temple in Nara, um, is they just grow cosmos of all colors. Usually you see cosmos in pinks and magentas, and but they have yellow and orange cosmos, and
Wow.
so it's maybe, I don't know, it could be let's say an acre of temple ground, and so they have Buddhist statues out in the garden, and the cosmos are just growing up around them, and they're
Wow.
just really pretty, and people come from all over to see the cosmos, and they bloom in October as the main viewing time for cosmos.
Be a cool place to meditate.
Yeah, they're the beautiful places, and there are other temples that are known for their peonies. I mean, they grow like thousands of peonies, and other temples are known for their irises, and you have fabulous iris gardens. So this temple pilgrimage, there are 25 temples that it's actually a designated pilgrimage. So
Okay.
lots of different pilgrimages in Japan, but this one is a flower pilgrimage, and you can go to these different temples and see these flowers. But of course, they bloom at all different times of the year. So you'd have to go there for, a lot of trips to be able to see the whole thing.
Right. How cool. I didn't had no idea. I'm really glad
Yeah.
you came today. I'm glad you wrote this. You enlightened me quite a bit. I want to, and the audience too, of course, I want to talk about the lotus, because when I think about Japan, I always think about the lotus. And
Yeah.
I wrote down lotus holds the potential for a variety of karmic repercussions. What does that mean?
Oh, that relates to the haiku that I think I included. It was,
Okay.
yeah, the haiku had to do with whether the monk would cut the lotus or not cut the lotus.
Yes.
Yeah, and that maybe there were karmic repercussions for that, depending on what he wanted to do with the lotus, or so.
So
I
talk
mean,
about this. They come from mud. I mean, we can be beautiful flowers emerging from mud, you say, of life. But
mhm.
I mean, talk about the lotus. It this
Well, the lotus is a symbol for enlightenment in Buddhism,
okay.
and yet it grows out of the mud of a pond. That's where it emerges out of the mud. So you could say, human enlightenment comes out of the messiness of our world,
Sure.
sort of like a muddy pond. We have a lot of challenges in life,
Right.
but if we rise above them, and the lotus literally does rise up out of the pond on these very long stems, and then it just has this exquisite flower that's just incredible. And and in Japan, you can, the lotus root is actually a food that you eat, and it's
Okay.
really quite tasty. It's
Oh,
usually sweetened a little bit, but it's also crunchy. And
okay.
it's, yeah, lotus root is a food that
Interesting.
you can eat in Japan.
Interesting. I'm gonna have to go to Japan. It's one place I've never been. Well, I want to
Um,
know what's been the reaction so far on the book?
I think it's probably too soon to tell,
Okay.
but there has been a fair amount of interest.
Nice.
And we'll just see. It just came out, was just released June 1st. And so hopefully people will enjoy it. And I
Oh
hope
yeah,
that,
I enjoyed it. I will tell you, I really enjoyed. I didn't get to read all of it, but it was really, I'm a flower lover. So a lot of
Yeah.
the stuff was so interesting to me, things that I didn't know that you brought up, and you related it to kind of to life.
Yeah, and I hope that readers will turn to nature when they need to feel a sense of solace, because it really is very comforting and healing. And flowers and trees and just everything. People need to get out in nature more. They really do, and grow flowers if you can. I mean, it's just so rewarding.
I agree with you so wholeheartedly, because I think a lot of us have gotten stuck in the house, especially during COVID, and then people don't want to go back to their jobs. They got
Mhm.
used to staying home. And,
Mhm.
a lot of times people don't want to go outside. And this may sound funny, but my cat, I have an indoor cat that wants to be an outdoor cat. And she constantly is like, let's go outside. And it's great because it forces me, because I'm the same. I'll get stuck in the house. But I love being outside with the
Mhm.
trees, especially
Mhm.
where I'm at here. It's in the Tonto forest, and the trees have energy and they have
Mhm.
wisdom, just like the flowers. And,
Mhm.
you talk about that in the book. And you find a sense of peace when you are out with the flowers and the trees, don't you think?
Exactly. In Japan, they have what's called forest bathing. Are you familiar with that?
No, tell us.
Can't remember the Japanese word right now. There's a special word for it anyway that I can't remember, where you go into the forest. It's called forest bathing, and you tune into the energy of trees. And there's certain areas in Japan where you can go and have those experiences, and people will guide you and do meditations with you. And they've been doing scientific research on how it lowers your blood pressure and makes you feel calmer, and gives you more peace of mind. And it's actually a scientific study. So
Mm.
it's quite fascinating.
I agree. I'm an intuitive and I'm an empath. And when I'm around trees, it's like water and trees.
Hmm.
Those are the two things that really
Hmm.
calm me down. So I know, and they have energy, and and if
Hmm.
you do tune in, which I do sometimes, I tune in, and you will receive
Hmm.
messages
Hmm.
from them because they've been here longer than we have, most of them, and they have so much wisdom.
Yeah, you mentioned that your mother had a garden and you grew up with flowers, and my mother did too. And my
Yeah.
mother really suffered a lot from depression. But her garden was what saved her. I mean, she would, go out in the spring and her personality would just change. It was so healing for her. So she was an avid gardener, and she even propagated a lot of her own plants, grew a lot of flowers, grew vegetables, just grew everything.
Mhm.
And it really affected her mental mood quite drastically. I mean, it really helped her get through life.
And look what it did for you.
Yeah.
Honestly, and I have to say that. I mean, we have to thank our moms for that, because I grew up the
Yeah.
same way. We always had gardens. She always had
Mhm.
beautiful roses, the most beautiful roses you ever saw. She would
Mm.
have in her garden, and
Mhm.
she would have all different flowers that, you wouldn't see normally.
Mhm.
So it
Mhm.
was just, yeah, and I agree with you. It calms you down, and it brings
Mhm.
a sense of peace
Mhm. Yeah, it really does.
to people.
Yeah, and so, working with flowers and Ikebana is just an extension of that, because you're touching them, you're handling them, you're
Yeah,
looking at them more carefully,
yeah.
and you absorb some of that energy. I Many times I've gone to arrange flowers, and maybe I wasn't in the best of moods, or I was feeling low energy or something like that, and I would work with flowers for an hour or so, and my mood just completely changed. It was so healing. And I actually had a Japanese Ikebana instructor from Japan who was very ill a lot when he was a child, and he turned to Ikebana as a healing modality.
Okay.
Um, it's yeah, I often mentioned that he was a sickly child, but that working with flowers really healed him.
Feel them. Wow. That's so amazing. You guys, the book is The Language of Flowers in the Time of COVID, Finding Solace in Zen Nature and Ikebana. It's wonderful. And it's by Joan D. Stamm. Joan, thank you. I'm so, do you want anything you want to leave us with today before we get out of here?
Yeah, well, just I said it before, I'll say it again, just get out in nature and really enjoy it. Go smell the flowers.
Go smell the
Go
roses.
look at, yeah, go look at the flowers, just be with plants. You won't regret it.
I think it's wonderful. Thank you for joining us today. Hey, you guys, if you're interested in having me speak at your next event, go to my website, nancyyearout.com, or if you just want an angel reading, you're welcome to go there, and you can read some new messages I've put up there from Archangel Gabriel, and you can check that out. So we're going to get out of here for today. This is Nancy Yearout. This is High Road to Humanity, and everyone have a fabulous week, and God bless.
Achieve your goal.